There is no evidence that Mr. Manafort colluded with the Russian government.
He was a shady figure to begin with, and it's caught up to him. But that has nothing to do with the president.
It goes on to show that there was no collusion or cooperation or coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia. Tony Podesta is now stepping down from his lobbying group because he is being investigated by the special counsel.
U.S. Navy SEALs captured one of the militants accused of orchestrating the deadly attacks in 2012 in Benghazi.
We may just see some justice for those 4 that lost their lives. The defense rests in the corruption trial of Democratic Senator Bob Menendez after the judge denies his request for a mistrial.
I think it's just very, very dangerous when we take what is today accepted as right and wrong and go back and say what those, what Christopher Columbus did was wrong.
Play the song because it's what you play on Halloween.
I love it. It's Halloween this morning, so as Brian says, get dressed, put on your orange today, your black today, dress up the kids, have a lot of fun.
Hey, you know what we just did?
What's that?
We blew it for the whole channel now. Nobody else can play this song because of that 25.
Oh, really?
Yes.
The whole channel's allowed to play the song
It's a music
once?
violation.
They can play another version.
Right, Shepard Smith, I'm sorry, you're out of luck.
Oh,
There's
well.
a song, Toba. Toba's our audio guy who's been on the show since the beginning, probably, right?
He's
so good. Toba, there's a song that we sang in first grade. We're going to have to find it and play it at some point.
Wait, first grade at your school in South Carolina?
Yes, and we would all stand up in the classroom, Miss Jones's classroom, and we would all do our stew. In our witch's brew, we got magic, alakazam, kazoo, and you put in like monkey tails. I don't remember what else. Fingernails, something, too.
Yeah, Toba, find it, all right?
In my witch's brew.
I'm sure he's got some...
It was such a cute song.
You know
all
what?
the kids loved it.
Apparently, Toba can't find it, but if you know what that song is, email us, friends at
My
FoxNews.com.
mom does. She was a school teacher forever.
Yeah, go ahead.
She found it.
That's it.
If you're a parent, you've got to find that on YouTube, and you got to play it for your kids. And get them all to stand up. Listen.
With their...
It's all kinds of gross stuff you put in there.
Just get your cauldron.
Y'all that made me so happy. Thank you, Toba.
Right.
So anyway,
by the way, there is no Toba.
A little less than 2 hours from right now, we're actually going to dress up in costumes. What do you think we're going to be wearing? Rick has emailed us his suggestion. And it looks like it's going to be the Wizard of Oz. I should be a scarecrow. Ainsley should be a lioness. And Brian Tin Man.
It's like
a Tin Man with no brain or no heart?
Oil can. Oil can.
Who needs a heart?
If I only had a heart.
The lion needs courage. The Tin Man needs a heart.
Right, I need a heart. I'll tell you what, I need Griff right now because we have some great news. The Benghazi investigation continuing, and we've got a big guy. We have captured one of the militants accused of orchestrating the deadly Benghazi attacks. Many people think this was his idea.
And he is expected on U.S. soil, and he's expected to face charges.
All right, Griff Jenkins joins us right now from Washington with what we know. Griff?
That's right, guys. U.S. Special Operations Forces and the FBI delivering some justice to the families of those 4 Americans killed in Benghazi, capturing an Islamic militant named Mustafa al-Imam along Libya's north coast. Imam is believed to have played an instrumental role in the attacks 5 years ago that killed U.S. Ambassador Christopher Stevens, Glenn Doherty, Sean Smith, and Tyrone Woods. President Trump, who gave the order for the high-stakes operation, said in a statement, quote, "To the families of these fallen heroes, I want you to know that your loved ones are not forgotten and they will never be forgotten." The Trump administration's vigorous pursuit for justice has differed from the Obama administration's response. Multiple congressional investigations have sought to determine if the Obama administration willfully misled the public when former UN Ambassador Susan Rice appeared on numerous Sunday shows blaming the attack on a controversial video.
There was a hateful video, a direct result of a heinous and offensive video. This is a response to a hateful and offensive video. Violent protest outside of our embassy sparked by this hateful video.
Attorney General Jeff Sessions vowed to continue investigating and holding accountable all of those responsible for the Benghazi attack and, of course, bringing al-Imam to justice. Sessions says that he's bringing Imam back to D.C. to face charges in federal court rather than being sent sent to Guantanamo Bay, which surprises some perhaps. But as you may recall, earlier this month, another member of this attack, the mastermind, is facing trial right now. His name is Ahmed Abu Khattala. So this seems to be how they're handling it as they bring these terrorists to justice.
It does. All right, Griff, thank you very much. Griff was just talking about federal court. Let's talk about U.S. District Court in Midtown, Washington, D.C., Mid-District, I should say. Yesterday, Robert Mueller's 12-point indictment was unveiled, charging Paul Manafort and Richard Gates with all sorts of tax and money laundering for things they did a long time ago. What's interesting, though, is apparently, you know, that no-knock raid they had on Manafort's house a couple of months ago? They were able to seize evidence that essentially linked Mr. Manafort to his lobbying days for the Ukraine, which Manafort himself had said it did not exist. So they asked for certain documents. He said, we don't have them. They found him at his house during the no-knock raid. That's not good for him.
He's looking at 20 years. Yeah, he's looking at 20 years in prison, and they got a series of things. It's up to, you know, you're talking about a conspiracy to launder money to the tune of $18 million. They say that they have an explanation for all of it. Rick Gates was his protege, so they're both locked up. The biggest surprise came about 10:30 Eastern time when they announced the indictment of Paul Papadopoulos, and this guy's a 30-something-year-old foreign policy advisor. He worked for free, but evidently in March of 2016 he met a professor in Italy named Joe Mifsud. He said it was no big deal. Turns out Mifsud connected him with a Russian who was tight with the Russian government, allegedly. So on the 27th of this year, January 27th of this year, he was asked about it. He didn't tell the truth then. Then on July 27th, they arrested him at Dulles Airport. Right. They kept it quiet. And they could have, judging by some of the legal language, flipped him. And many are wondering inside the White House, what did he do at that time? What was he taping? Perhaps it's this is like what they do with the mob. They get somebody, they tell them it's going to be curtains, and they scare them into turning in somebody more important than that.
Well, he already pled guilty, so you know.
But we don't know what he's going to be. We know indicted for, and what he's up against, depending on what he gave up.
He pled guilty to lying to the feds. That was the charge.
Right, but in terms of what they're going to ask in terms of the sentence is all about his cooperation, and they indicated he is cooperating, which is people in the West Wing upset right now.
Well, the president responded, said, sorry, but this is years ago, before Paul Manafort was part of the Trump campaign. But why aren't Crooked Hillary and the Dems the focus? Then he goes on to say, also, there is no collusion.
Also, we had Corey Lewandowski on the program just about a half an hour ago, and he said this about what's going on.
The indictments that Paul Manafort and Rick Gates that have been handed down to them had obviously nothing to do with their tenure at the campaign. They were from incidents that took place more than a decade ago. And what I think is very important is if it is true that Paul was under a FISA warrant prior to coming under the campaign, then I think the FBI should have probably notified the campaign and said, look, you've got a person here who is currently under surveillance, and we want to raise that issue to you so you're aware of it. Never was I contacted, never was the president or the candidate contacted about any relationship that Paul Manafort might have had by a government authority.
As wonderful as that sounds, they can't do that. The FBI couldn't go up to if someone were applying for a job at Fox News and tell the bosses, hey, we're looking at them, we're investigating them.
There's a FISA warrant.
Right, until they find them guilty, right? You can't call someone a job.
I understand his sentiment, though. What's interesting, though, is they're throwing the book at Manafort, assuming that he would flip and then say something, I have this information about Russia, which, you know, essentially assumes he knows something about Russia, which a number of congressional committees thus far have not been able to find or prove.
But it shows a couple of things. That this is a wide-sweeping investigation beyond Russia, because Paul Manafort's linked to the Ukraine, and what he did prior to that clearly had nothing but beyond the campaign, but also beyond Russia, because most of his links were to the Ukraine and a pro-Russian Ukrainian government and international lobbying. It also shows that they can flip a witness and keep it quiet, because nobody had the Papadopoulos story, and that happened in the summer, and here we are at the end of October. So
meanwhile,
it could be even more sweeping, which makes people wonder what is the goal? What is the goal of this? I mean, is anything that anybody ever did in and around the administration up for grabs? And why isn't, if they really want to be a fair and balanced investigation, why isn't the Tony Podesta thing flagrantly out there? Why did he get to resign and other people get indicted?
Well, you know, this is just the opening salvo. We don't know what is going on. Ultimately, what we have seen, though, is Russia tried to manipulate our election. The big question is, was there any involvement with the campaign? So far, we have not seen any. All right. Meanwhile, last night on Laura Ingram's premiere, she had as a special guest the Chief of Staff, John Kelly.
That's right. She asked him so many different questions. It was a great interview last night. Congratulations to Laura and to Shannon Breen. Their shows launched last night. But she sat down with him for about 30 minutes. I watched the whole interview. I stayed up way too late, but it was so fascinating. And he talked about different things from, you know, walking in Arlington when he spent that hour in response to those soldiers that were killed. He also talked about the removal of the plaque at Christ Church, which is an Episcopal church in Arlington, Virginia, right? It's in Arlington.
George Washington's church.
Alexandria, Virginia, and that's George Washington's church. Well, a lot of the leaders of the church are taking down the plaque, the George Washington plaque, because they say it makes some of the parishioners feel unsafe. This was his response to that.
Well, history's history. I think we make a mistake, though, as a society and certainly as individuals, when we take what is today accepted as right and wrong and go back 100, 200, 300 years or more and say what Christopher Columbus did was wrong. 500 years later, it's inconceivable to me that you would take what we think now and apply it back then. I mean, I think it's just very, very dangerous, and it shows you how much of a lack of appreciation of history and what history is. I would tell you that Robert E. Lee was an honorable man. He was a man that gave up his country to fight for his state, which in 150 years ago was more important than country. It was always loyalty to state first back in those days. Men and women of good faith on both sides made their stand where their conscience had them make their stand.
So there's John Kelly, just like the headline says right there, erasing history, a dangerous mistake.
What do you think, Brian?
We'll talk about it in a little while. I know we got to get to, all right, I guess we'll get to headlines a little bit later. All right, 12 minutes now after the hour.
Coming up, Robert Mueller issuing the first indictments in the Russia probe, but our next guest is a former federal prosecutor and says he may not be interested in justice at all. So what are they interested in? We'll find out next.
And he's a Hollywood A-lister that's been an outspoken critic of President Trump. But this morning, Bryan Cranston has the president's back. Special counsel Robert Mueller issuing the first indictments in the Russia probe, but is justice the real focus of this investigation? Our next guest says that a look at his lead prosecutor tells you otherwise. Here to explain why is the former federal prosecutor and author of License to Lie exposing corruption in the Department of Justice, Sidney Powell. Thank you, Sidney, for being with us.
Good morning. Thank you, and happy Halloween.
Oh, to you too. Can you tell us more about this lead prosecutor? His name is Andrew Weissman.
Yes, Mr. Weissman was deputy director and then director of the Enron task force, which was notorious for abusive tactics and prosecutorial overreaching for a decade in its conduct of the Enron and related cases. For example, he destroyed Arthur Andersen and its 85,000 jobs with an indictment that didn't even state an offense, really. He had cobbled together parts of different statutes to make a crime out of something that wasn't. Andersen was destroyed, and 3 years later, the Supreme Court unanimously reversed it, with Justice Rehnquist writing for the court that it was shocking how little criminal culpability the jury instructions required, and Andersen had no way to know that its conduct was illegal.
He's also given money to past presidents, the DNC. He gave money to President Obama's campaign and the DNC. No record of him giving money to the Republican Party, correct?
Not that I know of. And he also prosecuted 4 Merrill Lynch executives and sent them to prison for a year on another faulty indictment, while he had yellow highlighted, he and his team had yellow highlighted but hidden evidence that showed they were innocent. So the defendants in the Manafort and Gates indictment or any other indictments that come forward need to do a really good job of trying to get evidence from the government that favors the defense.
So what is the goal here? What do you think Robert Mueller and his 16 lawyers that are on this team, what is their goal?
I think the entire investigation was set up basically to impugn this presidency and to make it as hard as possible for Mr. Trump to carry out his duties. It's been way too wide-reaching. The scope of it was too broad. It's got problems from its inception.
If that is true, that's corruption. What do you think of these charges yesterday?
I thought they are written to make it sound like even the most innocent act is a crime when it's not. I think they can be picked apart, and when scrutinized, many of them will fail. I think a lot of the conduct that is described in it is actually innocent, and there is not a tax offense alleged. They talk about him having failed to report certain income on his taxes, but there's no tax count in this indictment. It's basically two very wide-reaching conspiracy charges, which enables them to prove their case by using only hearsay evidence. They wouldn't even have to have an actual witness to whatever conversation they deem criminal to proceed with the conspiracy charge. They can use what somebody told somebody else that may not even have been right. So, and then the other charges are false statements and failure to file certain forms. So it's an unusual indictment.
All right, Sidney Powell.
And I think it's really just a shot across the bow.
All right, Sidney Powell, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. A warning before you go trick-or-treating tonight. Drugs are already turning up in kids' candy bags, so you need to know some of this as a parent coming up. And you know him as the creator of Dilbert the comic, but he was also one of the first people to predict President Trump's victory. How did Scott Adams do it? He's going to tell us next. Good morning. A Fox News alert. The manhunt for a suspect intensifying as we learn the identity of the person shot and killed in a carjacking at the University of Utah. Police say Austin Butane killed Chen Wei Gao, a student from China. The shooting causing a 6-hour lockdown. It happened shortly after Butane's wife went to campus to report that he had assaulted her. Classes are canceled today as police and the FBI continue to hunt for Butane. Another court battle involving the Trump administration, this time over the transgender military ban. A federal judge blocking most of the president's order to stop transgender people from enlisting. One part of that policy, though, can stay. The judge ruling government funds cannot be used for gender reassignment surgery. Let's talk Monday Night Football. Kansas City Chiefs cornerback Marcus Peters staying in the locker room during the anthem before helping his team beat the Denver Broncos 29-19. But the NFL's ratings continue to take a major hit, thanks in part to the World Series. The Astros' wild 13-12 victory over the Dodgers in Game 5, topping Sunday Night Football by more than 3 million viewers. Game 6 is tonight, so look at your headlines, guys. Do or die game.
All right. Thanks, Jillian. No editorializing. 25 minutes after the hour, you know him as the creator of those famous Dilbert comics, but he also is one of the first people to predict that Donald Trump would win the presidency.
Scott Adams revealing how Donald Trump used the power of persuasion to earn his place in the White House. In a brand new book, it's titled Win Bigly, Persuasion in a World Where Facts Don't Matter. And he joins us now. Good morning to you, Scott.
Good morning.
How old is Dilbert, first of all?
Oh, he was born in 1989, so, you know, the big 3-0 is coming.
I was surprised Dilbert got political.
Well, he didn't get so political.